Welcome to Holistic Strategies, where we discuss the interconnectedness of body, mind, and spirit, and how you can tap into your highest potential while living a natural life of balance and adventure. On this episode, I get interviewed by my friend Alexander Radburnd from the Gentleman Warrior podcast, where they discuss a lot about Stoic philosophy and how to apply this knowledge to the current times we live in right now. I highly recommend you check that out. On this episode, we go really deep into how Eastern and Western philosophical concepts actually intersect and how you can potently apply this knowledge in practice, not just in theory, to your everyday life to amplify your quality of life. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, feel free to drop me a review. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's Alexander here, and I'm here with Trevor Camplin, who not only happens to be a subconscious reprogramming coach, but on top of that, has got one of the most fascinating lifestyles of any man I've yet encountered in life. So, Trevor, let me just say thank you so much for joining me for the conversation.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, so where I want to kick everything off is for anyone listening and watching, the way in which I met Trevor was a friend of mine said, hey, we should go out and visit this guy because it basically sounds like him and a bunch of his friends who are all interesting dudes have got themselves a house in the middle of the jungle and they've turned it into a creator lab and they're doing something totally different. So let's go out to his house. And I came out and basically stumbled across an epic environment where it felt like you and a bunch of like-minded men were ignoring whatever the standard way of life might be and had just decided to go your own way and figure something out. So do you think you could just give me a little bit of insight? What was the impetus behind going out and doing this? And what's the vision you guys are working towards?
The circumstances that brought us all together were kind of mysterious, I'd say. But I'd been living life like that for a while leading up to it. So we all had a mutual friend, and she's a very good communicator and networker. And she knew that I had a background in working with audio, mastering music and things like this. And she said, hey, I want you to meet these guys who are building a music studio in the jungle. And I thought, okay, let's go with it. Let's go out there and see who these people are. And I came over here, I got to know them. And it was this guy, David, from the UK. He had this vision to get out of a metropolis area that was not suiting him very well. And he landed in Bali and he fell in love with Bali very quickly. And then wanted to make a project where 4 different nodes would feed into each other, kind of like how permaculture works. It's all about different little sections of land feeding into each other and creating a circulatory process. So he had a vision to do that. I came into the project. We had another friend from the States who was on the project who's now departed, but I've stuck around and we've been building this thing out bit by bit. And we have been going through our own transformative processes ourselves as everything's been coming together. And then we've have an ongoing new cast of characters who've been coming in to live with us for different intervals. And now I think we've got the project to a point of where a really solid, clear foundation has been put together. And yeah, our passions all intersect with each other. It's a bunch of outliers. It's a bunch of artists. It's a bunch of crypto nerds and entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, people like that. And we all have a very similar vision of what we want to do in the world and how we can use an area in the world like this to connect with the rest of the world and broadcast and have our little shows and whatever it is we produce.
Right. So on one level, you've got this location, which is ideal for things like retreats and to bring guests out. But another side to it that I'm really curious about is you each are these motivated guys who you enjoy the gym, you enjoy nature, you all have professional projects. Are you able to capture it in an essence at all what makes the difference between, let's say, if you guys were all just going about your pursuits individually in a town together where you could meet up regularly versus when you are all in the same shared location? Is there any major benefit you notice from the change?
Yeah, definitely. I'm more of a hermit type in general, but I see the vital need for human connection. And so I've spent a lot of time being a hermit, and then I've come into an environment like this, and it's tested me. It's allowed me to mature and grow. And I feel like the other people here, they're not all hermit types in their personalities, but nonetheless, they have grown and matured themselves in ways that maybe they wouldn't if they were in a environment that didn't nurture that. So coming together here, we have a unique type of accountability that we didn't have otherwise in our lives. I lived in Bali for a long time solo by myself, and I would do my best to go about my life and grow and mature in the ways that I saw fit. But this adds an element of spontaneity into the mix that you don't always have when you're flying solo. So now we kind of call this it's like our fleet. We're each a boat in the ocean, right? And we're choosing to sail together in this fleet. And we can dock at different harbors together. We can allow our projects to intersect. We can offer business help in many different ways. We all have different unique skill sets and talents that we can share with each other. So yeah, we see it as a prosperous kind of endeavor that we've put together.
I hear you. And look, I resonate a lot with what you're saying about this hermit type personality. I'm curious, does it still on a daily basis require sort of active intention from your end to connect with the fleet as a part of your day, or perhaps as a part of every other day, or however it might look? Or has it become far more natural to you where it's not so much of an effort so much as a positive flowing thing that you just look forward to?
Good question. I think what I've observed throughout the process is that sometimes we have our own individual preferences in life, right? Based on our conditioning, based on what our up-to-date level of cognizance is at. And then there's times where you feel like you're being tested or challenged. I think what I've learned in this process is if I surrender to the flow of the day and to try to meditate and entertain the possibility that my challenges are not challenges, but they're actually opportunities.
Yep.
Then the flow increases. So the little stream turns into a river and everybody's thriving, including myself. So I see everything in this world, like each thought process that each individual is going through. Yep. They are a node within a network, within a motherboard, basically. And then we have a psychic connection that can be very subtle sometimes, it appears. But if you surrender to it and you open up to it, we are all speaking to each other in other ways other than just through our mouths or how we communicate online. And so I have seen this psychic experience start to blossom here on the property as well. Like we are being more led by intuition as we live.
Oh, it sounds like such I don't want to say effortless, but a more natural way to live than certainly how I've approached life at many times, and hope to be getting more to a state like that with every day. And when it comes to the different skill sets and interests that you each bring to the table, what are some of the other things? I know that you yourself are coaching entrepreneurial minded people and, these people who seek personal freedom and self-actualization. But you've mentioned that there's a harmony with the other guys there. So what sort of things are they into?
All of our values are kind of coming together in ways. We're learning from each other, and we're realizing that we do value some of the same things in life. And I think it's all going towards a direction towards maybe the natural flow of life, you could say. Not fighting with our hormones and just accepting the hormones that we have in a way.
Right.
But everybody has a unique skill set, but at the same time, those values, like I said, are homogenizing in a way. Because it's very beautiful. It's great. I think we're being influenced by our surroundings as well, just being so close to nature. But we have some people here who are very good at business. and they want to share these skills. We have some people here who are very good at public speaking,
Right.
who are encouraging us to perform our best in front of an audience. We have some people who are more introverted, some who are more extroverted. We have some people who are very good with analyzing markets and predicting markets.
Mm.
And then we have some who are very good at using raw resources to transform things from one state into a different state.
Wow.
So all of these differences work together, and it turns us into kind of this little miniature God mind that's communicating with itself.
Mm. You know, just to maybe pontificate a little bit on what you said there about how it's shared values that seem to be the things that unite all of you, despite differing skill sets, despite differing preferences for the amount of socializing you like and things like this. Something that's been really on my mind recently is this idea of, if we were to strip away everything and look at every person for who they are, the one thing that everyone always has control over is their morality, right? Their ideas of what is right, what is wrong, what is good behavior, what is bad. And personally, I see these as the essence of what unites us or pushes us away from each other. And it's funny, you're in Ubud right now on the outskirts, and something that I really could not resonate with often in the, let's say, new age spirituality type of thinking that is capturing a lot of people in our generation, was this idea that morality has no place. To say if something is right or wrong is not the move, because it just is. And as I look at men or people, for me, I really do see it as what you think is right and wrong is kind of the thing that makes me like you or dislike you. It's that simple. It's the thing that draws me to you, or the thing that pushes me away from you, because I can see with my mind and my beliefs what sort of a vision you're going to build based on what you think is good behavior and what you think is bad behavior. And what I'd love to know is, do you have any sort of resonance with this or disagreement with this on this idea that morality is actually the one thing that's always within our control and kind of the differentiator between who you are and who you aren't?
Good question. Layered question too. I like this. So I like to, when I'm receiving a question like this, I like to pull way out and use everything in my arsenal at the same time if I can. Mm-hmm. So I subscribe to Taoist philosophy, Advaita Vedanta, and Hermeticism and Buddhism for the most part. So I'm using all of these to my advantage to understand the natural world. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I can gain a sense of what's right for my particular trajectory or ray. I understand that not everybody's going to take the same path as this avatar, as this body-mind complex, mm-hmm. and that's okay. And if I can accept that, then this body will feel less resistance towards what happens to be unfolding, whether it's natural or unnatural, right? Mm-hmm. Because I have a propensity within myself to want to cling to what is the most thriving parts of nature and to stay away from the decay. But mm-hmm. at the same time, I understand that the decay that we see in nature has a veritable use case. It is in the process of going from something that is thriving into something that is dead, mm-hmm. quote unquote, but that deadness can be used to generate something new once again, like we see with mushroom networks, for instance.
Yep.
It's an ongoing fountainous process. Life, birth, death, they are all in agreement with each other from my perspective. But my question is, where does this body thrive the best within that whole scheme, that circular scheme, right? Mm-hmm. And so I could pull surf analogies out and use it like that. You want to be standing on the wave instead of being under it. You know, that's mm-hmm. the goal. Mm-hmm. Being in the now moment is going to be great for the mind as well, because you're not in a state of resistance. You're in a state of flow and acceptance. And that's going to promote love within yourself. You're going to be able to embody love. So I will watch everything. I will see how nature is thriving, and I will also see how nature is falling apart. And I will accept that both of these polarities are in agreement with each other, even mm-hmm. if it doesn't look like that sometimes. A palm tree, to me, is the best example. I can look at the top of the palm tree and I can see all this thriving green life filled with H2O inside of the leaves, right? And then at the bottom of the palm tree, I see the brownness. I see how it's shriveling up, how it's getting crunchy and whatever. But as an alchemist, I can use that part of the palm tree as well for different use functions, right? So instead of fighting it, I will bring it into myself and flip it on the other side. It's kind of a jujitsu mentality.
Yep. I hear you. And so if we use that lens, I love what you're saying, that the world around us, as we observe it, there is cycles to everything. Neither is good or bad. There is a natural, a flow, an up and a down, a birth and a death. And amongst all this, there's us, where we have conscious control over our actions. And something that I really love about, if you look at the one of the segments on your website, you'd say that you're here to basically restore order to the collective chaos. And personally, I think that that's exactly, I've come across the definition of us men, that literally our mission, our essence, we are here to restore order to chaos. Nature is chaotic. We, with this, are capable of enforcing order. And through that order, we can then create a foundation or a container for life to thrive. And so how do you find this, let's say, the dichotomy between the turbulence and chaos of nature and then this ability of us men to institute order into it? How do you see your role there? Like, do you see it as a sense of responsibility? Do you see it as, nope, it's best we just go with the flow? What's your perspective on that?
I think I bring it back to what I observe within the human body. So the human body is going to have soft tissue, and then it's going to have blood. Right. And those could be perceived as very yin. And then you have masculine aspects to the body as well, like the bones, for instance, and maybe the more dense muscle.
Right.
So my question is, if you're living in a time like this, where chaos has maybe tipped the scales a little bit too far, how can we live our own lives individually and then also promote a lifestyle that is healthy and balanced to people while tipping the scales back to equilibrium?
Yes, right.
How can we embody the feeling of it? How can we actualize it into our actions and our observance through our sense organs? How can we literally live that life of balance and then showcase that to people as well without showing off, just being it from a genuine state? So that's the question that I ask every day. How can I live that life right now today in harmony with nature, and even by not resisting the evil that I see in the world, or the imbalance of chaos is something you could call it.
Right. As I'm assuming that's because those are things outside of your control. You can have no influence over it. So to invest your energy and attention in dwelling on the negative side of it would be a exercise in futility.
Exactly. Do I want to go to war with it? Is that of my best interest? Right. Or do I want to understand it and become an alchemist within that whole scheme?
I get you. Maybe just my own perspective on what you said there about how do you let the self flourish while supporting the restoring of balance to the world and other people. The way I personally see things is how to ruthlessly, relentlessly, and unapologetically chase your own personal dreams, to be selfish, as it might be described, to me is to get tastes of self-actualization. And by becoming more confident, positive, strong, all of these things, your own impact, I feel you can't help but eventually, through your own self-actualization, provide for the people around you. And I think maybe the trap that gets lost in dialogue these days is when people say, don't be selfish. To me, selfish acts are not necessarily the things where it's like you are reserving time for your own pursuits, for your own development. True selfishness is more like the temporary pleasures that serve you, whether that's lust, whether that's, just very trivial desires. Like, I think there's a huge distinction between being selfish in terms of unapologetically chasing your dream and actualizing whatever it is that Trevor would love to bring into this world, versus your desire to go out and drink and get laid. Do you have any perspective on this at all?
Yeah, I think about this stuff all the time, this topic, and I can see a certain disjointedness in society between the conditioning of the mind and the natural desires of the heart. One of my favorite teachers, Nisargadatta Maharaj, even addressed this in his book, I Am That, when he had someone asking him questions about this. And he said that there are right desires, there are correct desires, because oftentimes that term gets conflated into all sorts of different things. But what is the difference between a right, correct desire and an incorrect desire? I think what we could observe within each of us, we could do this every day if we want to mature more, is ask, what is the source of the feeling of desire? There's going to be an emotion there, there's going to maybe be a thought there, and there's going to be a sensation in the nervous system that come and go with each other. Question the source. Does it come from an image that society has implanted into my mind? And has society come to that realization from a perspective of fear and lack? If that's the case, if you can detect that, then you can let go of that. Do your desires, true desires, authentic desires, come from a place of lack or fear? Why would they? And that's when we start to move more into the heart, into the core center of our being. To me, that's where the real desires are coming from. The desire to want to have a healthy relationship with a partner, or to eat healthy food, or to live in a place that you know is safe, where you appreciate your neighbors and your natural surroundings. I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. I think that's coming from a very ancient place within ourselves. It has nothing to do with fear or lack or not having enough in some way.
Love the way you see things. It's so clean. But the only thing I'd love to add on top would be, from my own experience, one such desire that I think is vilified, that I think is actually misunderstood, is this ability to have an influence on the world, aka to have power. So to actually use your judgment to see an opportunity for the world and to put that into action, I think needs power in order to be actualized. And this idea that power is something that is a negative force, I don't think could be further from the truth. It seems to me like it fits into your template there of one of these desires that comes from a place of creativity and positive change more than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings up to mind a quote from the Tao, when the Tao De Jing says, mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. But then let's ask the question, once we have mastered ourselves, once we have been selfish and we have mastered ourselves, aka moved past the limitations of the mind, what happens next? I think that influence over others might become a natural thing that's unfolding, basically. Like, you have power and you're exuding it effortlessly from the core of your being, and things just start happening in your life without you having to rule with an iron fist in any way.
Yeah. I love this topic. And I feel perhaps if we think about that idea of what is transcending the mind, what is transcending the lower level, perhaps like we could even use this scale of from the lower vibration of matter through to the high vibration of spirituality, of spirit. The ultimate experience, I'm literally reading a book on this right now that is arguing that the total transcendence of the mind, or of the, let's say, animalistic desire, is to transcend lust in its entirety. And that it's, if we think about the animalistic desires of the flesh as firmly anchoring us to matter, to lower vibration, that it's only once we not only disengage from that sexual act as an act of pleasure and we save it for reproduction, but as well as that, we refrain from even the mind drifting to pleasures of that nature, that it's only by doing so, when we've transcended that very baseline animalistic type of thinking at that level of vibration, that we make the room to receive the creative, intuitive, divine type of thinking and inspiration and creativity that that is accessible to us as being divine creatures. And just to share my personal experience, I've never in my life taken it to that level before, where it's both physically being abstinent and on top of that, removing all thoughts. And so this new idea to me is like, wow, okay, has to be experimented with because the reasoning feels compelling. Have you had any sort of experience with any of these type ideas?
Yeah, this is on my mind frequently, especially lately too. In astrology, I have a midheaven placement that is in Taurus. So this is what originally clued me in to understanding more of my life path, because real astrology is getting into the path of the soul and what was there prior to the birth of the body, and that there's a mystical unfolding happening in life, and there's many layers to it. So what we can see with our biological eyes is only part of the equation going on. But in the experience of this guy, of Mr. Trevor, astrology is suggesting that my life path is going to involve a vertical balance between the higher nature and the lower nature, an acceptance of the lower nature, of the physical, tangible things in life, and not just getting stuck in the intellectual realms.
Right.
So for me, for my trajectory array, it's telling me that pleasure can be there, but it doesn't have to be perceived as the end-all, be-all in life. Kind of how I saw it as when I was younger, like a teenager or early 20s or something. And that you can be rooted firmly in earthly matters, but they are kind of a foundation to your house.
Yep.
And you don't have to live in the basement.
Wow.
There's a maturity that can be built on top of that foundation of the lower nature. So the lower nature is now not good or bad or seen as naughty or something like that, but it's kept on a leash by the higher nature. And both respect each other. Both are in harmony with each other in this vertical way. But it also gives me the image of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, or the caduceus of Hermes Trismegistus, where the Ida and Pingala from the lower nature, from the base of the spine, are coming up to bloom at the Ajna chakra here. So there's a full vertical agreement going on within the body of the lower nature and the higher nature. And they're all communicating with each other in this vertical network.
Right. Yeah, that sounds healthy. That's the only way to put it. Okay. Perhaps like... as you basically, it's really clear to hear just talking to you. Oh, sorry. I should also say to anyone watching or listening who is unfamiliar with astrology, I'm going to just put my hand up and say, I myself have not deeply investigated this territory. It's not so much the paradigm at this point in my life that I find the most intuitive. With that said, I've had things described to me from people who are familiar with astrology that are so uncanny that my very rational, principle-based thinking really gets stopped in its tracks. And it basically right now, I put my hand up and I say, I don't understand this paradigm, but to dismiss it as being airy-fairy, as being woo-woo, as having no real concrete impact on this world, I can straight up say that is a false way to think. There is something to astrology that whilst I myself have not got there yet, and maybe it's not the field for me because I do have my own sort of things that I'm drawn to magnetically, there is something here. So for anyone who's listening or watching who kind of like might have zoned out at that, trust me, that is a fascinating world that absolutely has secrets for us. Now, Trevor, you mentioned basically you've been referencing everything from Taoism through to these, what I assume are Hindu, like stories and understandings that come from India, perhaps. Like I'm also hazy on this side of things. And what I get is like clear evidence that you are a learned man, that you've been asking questions for a long time and following the clues. And so I've got a quote from you here, for you here. And it's from the book I'm reading at the moment that I found it really interesting. And what I would love to do is I want to read it to you and just get your hard and fast perspective on whether you feel it's accurate, it's inaccurate, whether your particular personal experience does not reflect this. Because it's just, I think for me, as someone who's just starting to more show myself to the public through social media right now, rather than operating just in small professional paradigms, it's something I'm experiencing and contemplating. So I'd love your thoughts. So what it says here: whoever pulls himself loose from the confining adherence to popular opinion and rises morally and spiritually above the surrounding group is scoffed and ridiculed. This has always been the fate of those who aspired to realities within instead of reaching, like the most of others, for unrealities without. Always, the wisdom lover is rebuked by the many as though he were beside himself. Always, men are attacked for seeking perfection. And if they try to tell the others that greater things can be acquired by renouncing the lesser, they are hated and despised. Always, men seek to vilify. Whoever teaches them to discipline the senses in order that their higher nature might appear, and he escapes with rare good fortune if his chastity and virility is not assailed. What else can be expected when the mass of men are so prone to lust that they cannot belie in any pleasure?
I'm getting some visions on this one. It's taking me back to antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think this was written?
It was in 1939. This came through.
1939? Okay. What I noticed when I study the ancient past and current affairs is that whatever's unfolding on the timeline seems to be very cyclical. And from my perspective, we've been going through a long phase in humanity for I don't know how many thousands of years possibly, where the topic of us being divine is not very popular.
Right.
It's actually quite frowned upon, and it's a shameful thing for people to think about. So my natural curiosity leads me to ask the question, why? Why is this happening right now? Why do people get so easily triggered anytime that I bring up the fact that they could be divine?
Mm-hmm.
What is it in them that has a repulsion to that? And to me, it would only make sense that we are kind of living within a season where that idea is very cold to us.
Right.
Right. And maybe it hasn't always been that way because everything is vibrating, right? Everything is oscillating at a certain way. And I see gears within gears working with each other. So there must have been a time in history where this wasn't the case, where we fully acknowledged our divinity and we respected that from one person to the next. Even looking at the term namaste would suggest that, and many other Sanskrit terms as well, and even terms in the Greek and the Latin as well. I think they would infer that there were times where certain cultures or maybe huge groups of people all agreed that we had a divine faculty that we should honor within each other instead of rebuke or try to hide from.
I have a feeling, whilst I don't know it in a concrete fashion, I have a feeling that signs from the past, beauty of the past, there are things in the creations that I think would indicate, put it this way, what you're making me think about is perhaps like the not ostentatious but glorious architecture in different buildings and different structures throughout history where that was not function alone. That was not raw practicality of a mental fashion so much as I assume there was a, let's say, divine creative flow to all of that being created. So that's about as far as my own knowledge goes on the topic, that I feel you're onto something here. The other thing that's coming up when you put it like this to me is, if you think about the way we're being socialized in schools, we do have, not only do we cover the hard scientists, the hard sciences, the STEM subjects, but they're actually pedestalized above other disciplines, and they are all firmly entrenched in the physics of the material world. So perhaps when you think about the volume of our education that is based on the tangible, that is based on the more practical animalistic side of the, I don't know if you subscribe to the idea that we're like half animal, half divine type of a being. Perhaps it's simply the unfamiliarity of talking about the divine, where you fear what you don't know, and there's not very little knowledge on this. The closest thing we've all got to go on that is maybe some church services we might have gone to as kids, unless you had parents of perhaps like a Hermetic type of inclination or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think a lot of it got confused with the language that we were using growing up. At least it did for me. I got too hung up on the words, and then those words formed into perceptions, and then those perceptions formed into feeling states within my body every time I would hear those words come up in a conversation or from somebody preaching or talking or whatever. And so I had to divorce my perception from the language for long enough to see what was going on. And yeah, I do agree with you that we have a lower animal nature and a higher nature that could be described as divine, meaning that we can basically choose where we want to go in this life and what type of elements we want to bring into our lives that we can attract to us. So I do see that we have this kind of electromagnetic availability to us if we want to use that. We have a feminine and a masculine. We can draw things to us, and we can also send things out and pierce the veil of mystery and kind of use this boomerang effect to observe when that's happening. So as a young boy, this idea of being one with that was not available. It's like, you're a body, you need to perceive yourself as if you are a body, and then there's a thinking mind, and then you have a soul, and we're not really going to define what that is, what that soul is, essence of you. And then there's God, and God is separate from you. There's a veil of sin between you and God.
Right.
But that's what was described to me. But I also see that narrative kind of trickling over into certain scientific forums as well, where people take on this huge sense of guilt just for existing. Like this ingrained sin topic as well. So I had to really push myself past that perception of this world and let go of it to feel at ease and balanced again, and realize maybe I'm not separate from divinity like I thought that I was. And if I was, what would possibly separate me from divinity other than incorrect perception?
Okay. Well, I would love to go deeper on this. So as you described that, one of the things you said here was essentially that we have this ability to pierce the veil of the unknown, and that is like accessing the divine. It's this ethereal side to life. Now, for my past self, if you told this to me as I worked cold calling jobs, as I went to university, as I did worked as a marketing consultant, I would have said, bro, how do I do this? You know, like, I just don't have any experience with it. And what's interesting is my own journey has revealed a pretty interesting pattern, which is this. When I first started spending intentional time alone with myself, with no distractions, so no input, whether that's a book, whether that's music, whether that's friends, nothing, just me. The first experience was turmoil, like just this discomfort. Whereas what I realized was happening was my mind was deliberately putting its attention on problems that I needed to solve. They were in the way of life. And so to go about that process of spending time with myself in the early days was not something I looked forward to. It was like pretty, oh shit, that's not desirable. But again, the mind was drawing attention to the next thing that needed to be addressed. And then I found over time, they would move to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until the layers of insecurity were wiped away. And then spending time with myself became where I would just have for some odd reason, I would just get thoughts that become articles, that become videos, that become posts, that become literally everything in terms of my creative expression. I want to say 80 to 90% of it only ever comes to me if I'm literally relaxing, lying down with my eyes closed, or I'm walking. Like, it's these intentional times with myself which seem to access the veil where all of a sudden these things, these pieces of inspiration just come through. And I mean, as a coach, as someone who's been interested in music production and things like this, for you, you know, is there a process? Has there been any type of mechanism that has allowed you to access that veil?
Yes. The sacrifice of the lower nature. Here's a good way. I think people our age can understand this. I think we all have an inner brat that we're dealing with. I,
Right.
me, mine. I want it now. I got to have it now. Society tells me this, and I'm this way and whatever. And we form an identity to this. But if we really want to mature and grow and come into our higher nature, that inner brat must be sacrificed on the altar of acceptance and letting go. But there's a gift that comes with this that many of us will never figure out, will never see it until we let go and actually sacrifice the inner brat. It's going to be a painful process maybe for a while, but watch a seed grow from its seed-like state underground. It's going to have to push up against all of this soil, all of this dense soil probably, until it eventually sees the light of day. And so the lower aspect of our mind that's really connected to the limbic system, that's connected to the R complex and the fight or flight mechanism that's there. That's fine, it's necessary for it to be there. That's going to start to blossom more into this lotus and eventually see the light of day. And it's going to come out of the mud of mystery and confusion. So there comes a point where we cross a Rubicon in our own lives where we realize this is going somewhere. I don't know where it's going, but it's going somewhere very promising. And it's going to teach me something. I should trust it.
So as we let go of that brat and stop giving into its demands on our attention and energy and time, is another way for someone who's maybe not yet internalizing everything in this, let's say on a layer of abstraction, like we're describing, we're talking about inner things, inner that. Could a way of getting to that process, or perhaps even the same thing, could that be auditing our time and being like, listen, this thing I'm doing, does it serve? Yes or no? And almost stripping away activities, behaviors, indulgences that have no higher purpose other than momentary, let's say limbic type activities, which is survival and reproduction oriented things. Are we on the same page, or no? Is this a different track?
We're on the same page, and I think I might have found a little shortcut that I could share. So the English language that most of us use and many other Western languages utilize Aristotelian logic. And Aristotelian logic tends to be in this either-or scheme. And I think Kierkegaard even touched on this as well. But it wasn't until the post-Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, like very soon after that, a guy named Alfred Krzyzewski created the field of general semantics, or the Institute of General Semantics, where he said the English language is the challenge you guys are facing. All of you quantum physicists are running into an interruption in your minds, and you can't conclude the data because you're thinking in an Aristotelian way. So if you drop the Aristotelian logic that's embedded into your system, then everything agrees. The English language now agrees with quantum physics. So what that means to me is oftentimes we are caught in this mechanism between desire and fear. And the type of desire that I'm talking about is, I don't feel like I have that, or I don't feel like I deserve that. Therefore, I must go get that so I can feel complete. In Sanskrit, this would be called a samskara. And it's something that we chase and chase and chase because we think that that thing or that person or that environment is going to bring us fulfillment. And on the other side of that is fear. It's like, please, please, no. So I really, really want this on one hand, and I really, really do not want this on the other hand. That's going to keep us stuck in the limbic system, train of thought and train of mind and train of action. If we can break that device and move, or we don't even have to break it, we can just move past it. Move past it, you stop supporting it. It starts to collapse. So you're no longer in this either or paradigm between desire or fear. They're not controlling you anymore. So the actions that you take in life and the things that you attract to you aren't necessarily coming from a place of lack or fear. And to me, that's the freedom that we're looking for. That freedom comes from the inside. It doesn't come from our circumstances on the outside like we think it does. But if that gets corrected and equalized on the inside, we might just happen to attract the things that we wanted all along.
I like that. And just for clarity, when you say there's this combination of both lack and fear, is an example of like the big desire, I want lots of money, and the fear is I'm terrified of not having any, or is it I want lots of money and I'm also terrified of having lots of money? Which is it the dichotomy, or is it more both a fear and a desire for the same thing?
Gotcha. We can do our best to describe it verbally. But
okay.
The true test for the listeners listening right now is you have to differentiate the different feeling states that you have in your body. If it feels like a kick in the stomach, that might be coming from a place of lack and fear. But if it feels good and expansive and it feels like, ooh, that would be a lovely thing to have abundance and a lot of money so that I could help. That's coming from a place of already having within yourself. It's coming from a feeling state, a genuine feeling state of already having.
Wow.
It's a different type of drive, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like putting a name to an experience that's, we're talking about something here it's like you say, it's hard to verbalize. It's, you're describing processes that I feel I undergo, and I undergo that with my conscious mind, like my conscious being, and yet like actually putting it into terms in the way you just described, that hasn't been done just yet. So yeah, this is interesting. And for anyone listening, and including myself, who might want to learn more about this lens, is there any book or resource out there at all that's a great move?
It depends on how much time you have. And it depends on how interested you are in the topic. But you could read the Cliff Notes to Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski, who was the grandfather of the General Semantics Institute and really got people thinking in a quantum way instead of this more ancient way. And nothing against Aristotle, by the way. No. I like Aristotle a lot. But some other books, I would say anything on the topic of Advaita Vedanta could really help people out as well. Because Advaita Vedanta cuts right to the chase when it comes to mastering the game of the mind. Because the game of the mind is very sneaky. It's polarizing. It's going to try to keep us either on the black tile or the white tile. And if we can pull out from that game, that's when our life starts to look a lot different. So I would suggest I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj is an amazing book. It's going to challenge a lot of people, probably most people, in terms of how they see the world and their place in the world. And another book I would recommend is The Planets Within. That's a book about Ficino, an alchemist. And this gets into the original psychological archetypes that were being used in antiquity. And I think a lot of the Neoplatonists were using it as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for the recommendations. Now, Trevor, I'm curious to know, prior to this world you've been living in of your own self-actualization, was there a particular trigger, some sort of an event, some sort of a dissatisfaction with how life was beforehand, how you described maybe living in the lower levels of behavior in your 20s and things like this? Was there anything? I think just it would be really cool to have a crystal clear idea of what it was that set you off on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout my childhood, I encountered a lot of things that were confusing to me that didn't really fit in my mind too well. They sounded more like excuses that I was receiving from the people around me. So I was never satisfied with the answers I was getting. And I promised myself, someday when you're an adult, you can have the freedom to ask as many questions as you want, to educate yourself however you want, and you won't have to settle for any kind of explanation that doesn't satisfy you. So as an adult, after I had a near-death experience at the age of 21, I remembered that again. I said, okay, now is the time I'm going to get back to getting satisfied from life instead of constantly feeling like I'm inconclusive about my existence and all of this. So yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent. I kind of divorced myself from common reality for the most part, and got away from certain lifestyle traits that weren't really serving me, like alcohol and whatever.
Yeah.
And I went off on my own for a while.
Hell yeah, man.
And I realized I had to do that. I had to face the fear of not being surrounded by people all the time. I wanted to be surrounded by a community. I wanted to be supported. But I said, what if I could become that for myself for long enough to gain a whole new perspective on life? So that's what I did, and it worked.
Man, I'm happy for you. And I'm curious to know, for clients you help, I assume you help a lot of people go through similar transformations in their own unique ways. What are some of the commonalities you see people going from and to during their work with you?
The common thing that I've seen with each person that I've worked with is that they've been in a higher state of fear when they first start with me. There's a lot of things in their life that they deem to be mysterious and very inconclusive about, basically unsatisfied with certain areas of their life. Are they divine? Are they not divine? What am I here to do? Do I have some kind of purpose or a mission or something like this? And I help them get clear on what that is. And then I start to see them smiling more often. They're laughing more often. They're starting to really enjoy this life instead of feeling like an outsider. And I like to attract the outsiders to me because they're the skeptics. I like to work with the skeptical people because I know they're ready to grow and to mature and to become the leaders that the world needs right now. I think that we need solid, confident, happy, loving leaders who accept themselves, and therefore they're much more able to work with whatever life throws at them.
Totally. The term in my world I use for people you're describing are truth seekers, where that, like you said, that feeling of receiving information, whether it's from just adults when you're a kid or from the media as an adult or as a teenager, where you see gears crunching in your mind, where there are anomalies here. There's something either contradictory, or you're not being told the underlying mechanism for why something is, and it sort of is a dead end in your mind. There's something there that is bothering you. That feeling, just to share your sentiment, I was that kid who annoyed adults accidentally just with how often I asked the question why, because I just wanted to get to the root, always the root of something, to understand it. And not only is it epic to hear that it's almost mirrored in what you've just told me about your own experience, but to hear that that's what your clients are like as well, and that there's almost like a magnetism drawing people like this together, to me, that feels really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm honored to know now that there's people like me in the world, or people like where I was at when I was 27 or 28 years old, who felt the same way I felt back then. And now I have found a way over the years to communicate with people like that and to help them find a position in this world that suits them.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I love how it ends up becoming leadership is one of the main facets. And personally, I believe that's because something I talk about often, and perhaps you might have seen in one of my reels or something, is how when you observe your own actions over 24 hours of every day, 7 days per week, and you see where that attention and time is going, and you respect how that's being done, you then give yourself self-love, self-respect. So you don't need it from anyone else. And when you don't need it from anyone else, you're now free to behave as you want, knowing that you have love coming from here. You don't need love from elsewhere. And there's something magnetizing about that, which other people find intoxicating. And when you describe the skeptical nature, where there are some people out there who are going, you know what, like that story from the news about insert topical issue here, I don't buy it. I want to find this out for myself. The person, I think, who finally gets just one taste, maybe two tastes of when you do get to the bottom of something, and you do see a story that makes sense, where you feel in here, oh, this is how things work. I have a feeling that between giving yourself internal validation, self-love, plus getting proof that your inquisitive nature will lead to a discovery which changes your perception relative to everyone else's perception. There's something between those two things that does create the leadership material for a leader, where it's your own volition, your own self-belief is the drive. It's like the engine of the train, and you can now tow carriages. You're going to keep going no matter what. And yeah, it would be lovely to see if this is a trend of more people going to come out of the woodwork with that type of mentality.
Absolutely. I see the wave forming right now, and I've been seeing it forming more so in the last 5 years than ever. In 2010, I had basically a really powerful Kundalini awakening without knowing what the hell that was. And so I was surrounded by people who also had no clue what that was. They thought I was going crazy. And there just weren't any yogis in the vicinity where I was living in the Pacific Northwest in the States at the time that I could find. But over the years, I was like, at first I'm thinking, okay, I'm on my own. I'm in a dark time. I'm living in a dark time. I feel like my light has come on. And there's no way that I can do this by myself. Like I need to find a community, and I don't know where to find them.
Yeah.
But within the last 5 or so years, I have seen so many more people come online to recognize the same things that I was recognizing back then, recognizing things within myself, confronting my shadow for the first time, which is not definitely not as popular back in 2010 as it is now. Jungian psychology, things like this. More and more people are warming up to this naturally. So I think that there is a momentum within consciousness at large that is creating a new society of people who are willing to think like this. They're open-minded to think like this. They're willing to entertain the possibility that there's a lot more going on here than we were once led to believe over the last 100 years of academia, especially.
Totally, man. And something that's sticking out to me as you say that is, you know, everybody, whether they are the general public, whether they are psychologists, academics, everybody has been so quick over the last 10 years now to jump on the bandwagon and say how horrific the internet is for us, how this new landscape of social media and YouTube and different platforms are corrupting our attention spans and all this. But what I'm seeing is exactly what you described, where to bring it down to the physical world, there it looks like I'm learning from guys 7 years younger than me who use their teenage curiosity, apply that to these wonderful tools that democratize information. And all of a sudden you're seeing, if you've got that truth seeker personality, then congratulations, you basically got born into a gold mine just to get lost in. And so perhaps like as we see more and more people, I think even at older ages, start to see the internet for what it is beyond the surface level. You know, when you are actively curating the feeds you're exposed to, when you are actively going down the rabbit hole beyond the 1.5 minute reel to the 1 hour YouTube lecture, to the book, and going deep on things, that we're in a golden age to create that natural, like you say, for that natural wave of new conscious thinking to arise.
Yeah, I see it being completely phenomenological. And technically, I see all of life, all of existence being completely phenomenological. And this is just the next tier coming through during this phase of humanity. I see it as a completely natural cycle. Even the chaos I can accept as part of the natural cycle. And that was a hard part to accept. Because we look at the world, we want to change the world, right? It's very popular to talk about, oh, I see the world, I don't like how it looks, I want to change it, I want to fix it. But if we apply that to ourselves on the inside first and go, wait a minute, where's that coming from within myself? Where's that perception coming from within myself? Why am I resisting the ugliness and the filth? What is it about that that I don't like? And you keep asking yourself this question over and over again. What is it about that I can't accept in the way that the world looks right now? Maybe the world is supposed to look like this because maybe the function of this world is to allow us the experience of this dichotomy itself. The point of life isn't to resist it or to try to become a fixer necessarily. I'm not saying that fixing can't happen, but to try to battle it is going to bring you that same resistance back into yourself. But if you break out of that resistant state, and you say, okay, it's not a challenge anymore. It's not a rigid challenge anymore in front of me. It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to work with the chaos. It's an opportunity to work with the decay. I'm going to use that to my advantage at this point. Then you really become the balanced alchemist on the inside, and you can use everything at your disposal.
Yeah, you're making me think of a pretty simplified version of looking at that, which is it puts two twin brothers next to each other, one being a down and out drug addict, the other being an entrepreneur. And when they're asked why, they both say, because my father was an alcoholic. And I see one of them as being like resistance and hate for it, and one of them seeing that as fuel. Like being exposed to the correct stimulus to direct energy in a particular direction, a positive direction.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say the difference between success and failure in that regard is that the success person has accepted their fate. And in Hinduism or in more esoteric branches of Hinduism, they're saying this is the difference between psychology and something called atmanology, where you rise from being an individual into merging with the whole. So you go from being a victim and having skin boundaries and, oh, poor me, and this is a tough life and everything. That perception of who you are, of your identity, breaks down and dissolves. And you merge into being the universal spirit itself. And what they're saying in Atmanology is that you were always that. So you can't become what you already are. But your perception of who you are, that perception in the mind can dissolve. And then the fairy dust moment comes in and transforms everything.
Interesting. As to put this through my own lens of just like my unique way of seeing the world, where we all of us men, we have insecurities that we are victims to. We see ourselves as victims to, particularly when we're young, unless we happen to have an outstanding parent who might guide us to it early. Otherwise, we figure out through our own pain that this is no way to live. But it's without that insecurity, it's when we actively attack it, face that fear, that we build a strength. The question I've then kind of asked is like, if there was never any insecurity, would you have ever had the motivation or the path to build what becomes a strength? The person who is weak and has no ability to defend themselves, when they're terrified of being beat up, or when they go to jiu-jitsu, when they go to Muay Thai and they become competent, they are now strong in that respect. Would they have even done that if they weren't particularly weak and nervous about it in the first place, and recognizing that as a deficit within themselves? And the second thing I see through that process is that as each of those insecurities is addressed and a man becomes calm, he then naturally starts to look at the bigger picture, because his attention is no longer needed on him so much. That's taken care of. And now it's like, how can this energy and creativity be applied to the outside or to the collective? And I'm wondering if had no idea. What did you call it? Atman thinking?
Yeah. In Hinduism, you have the Atman, and that's the universal soul. And so a lot of us, and especially in the New Age movement, a lot of us take ourselves to be an individual. And it definitely appears that way. It definitely looks like we could be separate from everything. But technically, our bodies are all made of the same elements as everything else is made out of. So we are part and parcel with this world. We do belong here. This is our home. We don't have to feel estranged to all of this. And once we can accept that, then I think life becomes a lot easier, because we don't feel like we're out of place any longer. We feel safe. And a lot of people, they don't feel safe in today's world. And they're the ones running around with imbalance of chaos in their lives much of the time. So if those of us who feel that chaos, they feel that inner turmoil, again, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity for you to come back to the center, because now you're able to recognize it. Once you recognize that you've gone off the course a little bit, that's a little prize that you've gotten, a little prize of realization. You can move back onto the road. It's much easier to travel on the road instead of driving through crazy terrain, Yep. And that pain of growth that we go through, that pain of maturing that we go through, that's fuel. That's the fuel for our vehicle.
Right. It's interesting. As you describe that, I think about my personal journey. And in my case, if I was still covered in eczema, having asthma whenever I did sports, having hay fever, sneezing my ass off every time I went out into nature. If you tried to tell me back then, stop thinking about yourself, start thinking yourself as part of a pack, those fears and frustrations that I had about those situations back then, I would have always had them as like barriers impeding me from connecting with feeling like I'm really a contributing member. But through that, being prepared to face fears, being inquisitive and solving those. And now it's like, oh, right. Okay. I'm me. I can now interact with the world from a place of strength. And now it feels like if you were to say to me, hey man, you're a part of the collective. Let's think about how your particular skills and interests and curiosities and strengths can all be amalgamated into the betterment of everybody. It's so interesting to me how it's like, now it's like, yes, this sounds great. I know I can contribute. I know I have things to offer. I know that I can be a part of the group without comparing myself to other parts of the group. And I'm just wondering if we're to zoom out and look at other humans' experiences, is it a case where we have some individualistic things to transcend to then give us access to that? Or was this just one of many routes that we can take to feel like we are becoming part of the collective conscious?
It will be different for everybody, but there will be noticeable similarities that go on. There will be like general similarities that happen between everybody, because we're all within, I guess you could say within the same network. We all exist as the same network. Yep. So we can either unconsciously miscommunicate with the network and ourselves, same thing.
Yep.
Or we can acknowledge what's really going on here. And as that acknowledgement comes forth, so does maturity. And what does that maturity look like? It looks like a balanced life where we're no longer fighting ourselves on the inside. Right. Therefore, we have no reason to fight people on the outside either, because we know if that sense of fighting, we know where it's coming from. We know the source of it. It's going to be coming from fear. Fear of being what? Yeah. Fear of being what? Being something that you're not. Maybe I'm not who I think I am. Maybe that's what needs to be corrected. If I'm part of the whole, there's no reason to fear. You're going to be taken care of, because this world will recognize you as itself in a reflective sort of way. If you think you're estranged, if you think that you're separate, then the world will agree with that as well, with that perception.
Man, I've got nothing to add. It's absolutely spot on. All I can think about is how, if we want to take this down to the physical reality, I'm thinking about how new creators, I've been no exception, find judgment from the pack. And you might have heard of the idea of crabs in a bucket, that the moment somebody starts to self-actualize, that the first thing everyone does is pull them back down. And exactly. And what's interesting though is the hate never comes from above. So the people who believe they're part of the whole, who have got past it, they're never, ever producing hate. It only comes from the people who still see themselves as separate. And like you say, their actions are reflecting their own internal environments and how they're perceiving reality, so that enables us to just let go of it and know that it's theirs, not ours. Yeah.
Absolutely. They'll have their time. As the Tao says, contemplate their return back to the source, which would be the Tao, right?
Yep.
They will have their opportunity to come back home into realizing who they've always been. But right now they're just on a little trip. And it's almost like they've taken a drug. A lot of them actually might be on drugs. A lot of people these days are on a lot of white collar pharmaceuticals that could be affecting their brainwave patterns. But yeah, they're on a trip. They're on a little vacation away from knowing that they've always been God, so to say. So I guess just maybe I've come to a point now where sometimes I just really want to grab somebody and wake them up, by the collar. But now I'm like, they'll figure it out along the way. But if they need my help, if they would like my help, then I will be available to them to talk about this.
Boom. Yeah, man. Well, look, I think that might be a lovely place for us to wrap things up. Unless, is there anything else you've got a perspective on you'd like to share?
I think we covered a lot of great stuff today, man. These are all my favorite things to talk about.
Perfect. Yeah, well, we can definitely follow this up again with another episode because when the time is right, because you have definitely got bodies of knowledge that I think your particular combination of different lenses that you see life through and have amalgamated and cherry picked from to create your worldview is not like anyone else's I've ever come across, and it feels very robust and deep. So I have a feeling like I could almost throw you topics for you just to analyze with your different perspectives, and it's going to be a great show where we always learn. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, man.
Absolutely. It's been amazing to be here with you today. So thanks for having me on.
My pleasure.